Hello again, my sweet nephews. I hope you're doing well. It looks like from here it might be snowing up where you are, but it's hard to tell from here, from my house to your house. Anyways, I hope you're having a good time, and I'm excited to read the last two chapters of this book, and then we'll be done. I did find another book that we can read. This is it's kind of like a chapter book, but not really like a chapter book. I think it has a bunch of different, just individual stories, but they're all about the same character. And it's called Uncle Wiggily's Storybook. And I remember when I was young, probably about your age, Grandma used to read these to me and I don't know if you'll have to ask your dad if she ever read these to him. I don't know. So I haven't read these or listened to them since I was your age. So I'll be excited to reread them with you because I don't remember them at all. So that will be the next time. But this time we're going to finish up our Adventures of Buster Bear so we can find out what happens. All right, Chapter 12. Buster Bear has a fit of temper. Do you know what temper means? A temper is when you get so angry and you're so angry, and usually you do something kind of mean when you're angry instead of doing something like that's okay with your anger, you do something kind of mean with your anger. But I can understand why Buster Bear is angry right now because everybody is doing what? They're all making fun of Buster Bear. Wah. All right. Buster Bear has a fit of temper. A temper is a bad thing when once it gets away. There's nothing quite at all like it to spoil a pleasant day. Buster Bear was in a terrible temper. Yes, sir, Buster Bear was having the worst fit of temper ever seen in the Green Forest. And the worst part of it all was that all his neighbors of the Green Forest and a whole lot from the Green Meadows and the Smiling Pool were also there to see it. It is bad enough to give way to temper when you are all alone and there is no one to watch you. But when you let your temper get the best of you right where others see you, oh dear, it certainly is a sorry sight. Now, ordinarily, Buster is one of the most good-natured persons in the world. It takes a great deal to rouse his temper. He isn't 1/10 so quick-tempered as Chatterer the Red Squirrel or Sammy Jay or Reddy Fox. But when his temper is aroused and gets away from him, then watch out. It seemed to Buster that he had had all that he could stand that day, and a little more. First had come the fright back there in the Old Pasture. Then the pail had slipped down behind his ears and held fast, so he had run all the way to the Green Forest with it hanging about his neck. This was bad enough, for he knew just how funny he must look, and besides it was very uncomfortable. But to have Sammy Jay calling everybody within hearing to come and see him was more than he could stand. It seemed to Buster as if everybody who lives in the Green Forest, on the Green Meadows, or around the Smiling Brook was sitting around his hiding place, laughing and making fun of him. It was more than any self-respecting bear could stand. With a roar of anger, Buster Bear charged out of his hiding place. He rushed this way and that way. He roared with all his might. He was very terrible to see. Those who could fly, flew. Those who could climb, climbed. And those who were swift of foot, ran. A few, who could neither fly, nor climb, nor run fast, hid and lay shaking and trembling for fear that Buster would find them. In less time than it takes to tell about it, Buster was alone. At least, he couldn't see anyone. Then he vented his temper on the tin pail. He cuffed at it and pulled at it all the time, growling angrily. He lay down and clawed at it with his hind feet. At last the handle broke, and he was free. He shook himself. Then he jumped on the helpless pail. With a blow of a big paw, he sent it clattering against a tree. He tried to bite it. Then he once more fell to knocking it this way and that way, until it was pounded flat, and no one would ever have guessed that it had once been a pail. Then, and not till then, did Buster recover his usual good nature. Little by little, as he thought it all over, a look of shame crept into his face. I guess it wasn't the fault of that thing. I ought to have known enough to keep my head out of it, he said slowly and thoughtfully. You got no more than you deserve for stealing Farmer Brown's boy's berries, said Sammy Jay, who had come back and was looking on from the top of a tree. You ought to know by this time that no good comes from stealing. Buster Bear looked up and grinned, and there was a twinkle in his eyes. You ought to know, Sammy Jay, said he. I hope you'll always remember it. Thief! 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 Screamed Sammy and flew away. That's the end of the chapter. Why do you think Buster Bear grinned and twinkled, and his eyes twinkled when he said what he said to Sammy Jay? You ought to know, Sammy Jay. Do you remember what it said about Sammy Jay in the beginning of the book? I'm going to go back and read it. Let's see here. Chapter was, I think, even on the very first page. Let's see here. Yeah, there it is. When Buster Bear was waking up, it said, he heard Sammy Jay way off in the distance screaming, thief, thief, and grinned. I wonder, thought Buster, if someone has stolen Sammy's breakfast, or if he has stolen the breakfast of someone else. Probably he is the thief himself. So that's why I think Buster Bear is grinning, because he says, you ought to know, Sammy Jay, that nothing good comes from stealing, because it sounds like he's always stealing. All right, next chapter, and I think it's the last chapter. Whoop, it is. Chapter 23. Farmer Brown's boy lunches on berries. When things go wrong in spite of you, to smile's the best thing you can do. To smile and say, I'm mighty glad. There are no worse, they're not so bad. That is what Farmer Brown's boy said when he found that Buster Bear had stolen the berries he had worked so hard to pick and then had run off with the pail. You see, Farmer Brown's boy is learning to be something of a philosopher. One of those people who accept bad things cheerfully and right away see how they are better than they might have been. When he had first heard someone in the bushes where he had hidden his pail of berries, he had been very sure that it was one of the cows or young cattle who live in the old pasture during the summer. He had been afraid that they might stupidly kick over the pail and spill the berries, and he had hurried to drive whoever it was away. It hadn't entered his head that it could be anybody who would eat those berries. When he had yelled, and Buster Bear had suddenly appeared, struggling to get off the pail which had caught over his head, Farmer Brown's boy had been too frightened to even move. Then he had seen Buster tear away through the brush, even more frightened than he was, and right away his courage had begun to come back. If he is so afraid of me, I guess I needn't be afraid of him, said he. I've lost my berries, but it is worth it to find out that he is afraid of me. There are plenty more on the bushes, and all I've got to do is pick them. It might be worse." He walked over to the place where the pail had been, and then he remembered that when Buster ran away he had carried the pail with him, hanging about his neck. He whistled. It was a comical little whistle of chagrin as he realized that he had nothing in which to put more berries, even if he picked them. "It's worse than I thought," cried he. "That bear has cheated me out of that berry pie my mother promised me." Then he began to laugh as he thought of how funny Buster Bear had looked with the pail about his neck. And then, because you know he is learning to be a philosopher, he once more repeated, "It might have been worse." Yes, indeed, it might have been worse. That bear might have tried to eat me instead of the berries. I guess I'll go eat that lunch I left back by the spring, and then I'll go home. I can pick berries some other day. Chuckling happily over Buster Bear's great fright, Farmer Brown's boy tramped back to the spring, where he had left 2 thick sandwiches on a flat stone when he started to save his pail of berries. "My, but those sandwiches will taste good," thought he. "I'm glad they are big and thick. I never was hungrier in my life. Hello!" This he exclaimed right out loud, for he had just come in sight of the flat stone where the sandwiches should have been, and they were not there. No, sir! There wasn't so much as a crumb left of those 2 thick sandwiches. You see, Old Man Coyote had found them and gobbled them up while Farmer Brown's boy was away. But Farmer Brown's boy didn't know anything about Old Man Coyote. He rubbed his eyes and stared everywhere, even up in the trees, as if he thought those sandwiches might be hanging up there. They had disappeared as completely as if they never had been, and Old Man Coyote had taken care to leave no trace of his visit. Farmer Brown's boy gaped foolishly this way and that way. Then, instead of growing angry, a slow smile stole over his freckled face. "I guess someone else was hungry too," he muttered. "Wonder who it was. Guess this old pasture is no place for me today. I'll fill up on berries and then I'll go home." So Farmer Brown's boy made his lunch on blueberries, and then, rather sheepishly, he started for home to tell of all the strange things that had happened to him in the old pasture. 2 or 3 times as he trudged along, he stopped to scratch his head thoughtfully. "I guess," he said at last, "that I'm not so smart as I thought I was, and I've got a lot to learn yet." This is the end of the adventures of Buster Bear in this book because, guess why? Because old Mr. Toad insists that I must write a book about his adventures, and old Mr. Toad is such a good friend of all of us that I am going to do it. The end. The end. And that is the end of this great chapter book that we were reading. I hope you really enjoyed it. I did. I thought it was full of some funny things and some nice things and some things that made me think about how to be kind to my friends. And I learned about some new animals. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Bye.